Hello, everyone. Hope you're all doing great. Thank you for joining us today. We're back with another exciting Guest Talks webinar, and today's discussion will center around the topic that many of you have requested through the surveys that we conduct at the end of each webinar, which is safeguarding, the challenges being faced in schools, and most importantly, we'll explore some effective solutions with our amazing panel of experienced speakers in the field. You'll hear from them shortly, but first, I'd like to say a big thank you to our webinar sponsor, Microsoft. Microsoft Education provides schools with solutions, technologies, and education expertise to accelerate opportunities for all learners. Their tools support diverse learning needs in a student-centered learning environment to provide equitable, inclusive, and accessible learning that inspires confidence and encourages independence. A few bits of information before we get underway. For all attendees, you can find the control panel on the side. There's a Q&A tab and another one for handouts. You can browse and download these at any time during the webinar. Please feel free to use the Q&A, ask us questions, as the panelists would love to hear your thoughts. And we'll try to address as many of them as possible at the end of the webinar. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our chair and moderator, Zan Khan, Head of Business Development at Education Perfect and partner at Zan Professional Development, to introduce the rest of the panel. Thank you, and over to you, Zan.
Thank you, Danny. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar on safeguarding in schools, addressing the key challenges faced by international schools and looking at effective solutions. It's my honor to welcome you all to this webinar. We've gathered here today because we've got a shared commitment to address one of the most critical issues in education, and that is the safety and the well-being of our students. In this interconnected world where global mobility is increasing, international schools play a crucial role in nurturing young minds from diverse backgrounds. However, it's our role, and it's as educators, and this is a privilege, to ensure that we support our students regardless of cultural differences, varying legal frameworks, and ever-evolving threats, to ensure that the safety and security of the students is at the heart of what we do. Safeguarding is not a task that can be undertaken overnight, or it's not something that can be finished at the end of each week. It's something that is an ongoing process, and it's our job as educators to ensure that we are embracing these opportunities and we are welcoming these opportunities to learn from each other and provide a collaborative and informative environment to ensure that we are supporting our community. The importance of collaboration extends beyond our immediate circles, and we must engage with the external stakeholders, parents, and local communities, as well as government relationships and authorities, to forge partnerships that strengthen our safeguarding efforts. By working hand in hand with all our stakeholders, we can ensure that we have a holistic approach to safeguarding that overcomes international boundaries and also institutional boundaries as well. So thank you so much. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce us to our expert panel this afternoon. As explained by Danny, my name is Zen. I'm the part of the business development team at Education Perfect. I'm also a partner at Zen Professional Development. I've been working in education for the last 15 years, and particularly focusing around safeguarding. I'm a member of the International Task Force on Child Protection, and I'm always happy to support and guide our community members when it comes to safeguarding. I'm now going to hand over to Mike. Mike Glanville is the co-founder and chief safeguarding officer at the Safeguarding Company. Over to you, Mike.
Great, thanks, Zen. Yeah, it's great to be here, and thanks very much for that introduction. Yeah, so my name's Mike Glanville, and as Zen said, I'm the co-founder and chief safeguarding officer at the Safeguarding Company. So I've got responsibility for all the safeguarding services on behalf of the company. We're a UK-based company, provide a range of services to schools in particular, and we provide those services to schools all over the world. We operate in around 56 countries, I think. So yeah, good to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Mike. My next panelist is Sydney Atkins. He's a Vice Principal and Designated Safeguarding Lead at GEMS Modern Academy. Over to you, Sydney.
Thanks, Zen, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm really excited and chuffed to be here this afternoon. Like Zen said, I'm one of two Vice Principals at GEMS Modern Academy. We are an ICSE Indian curriculum and IB curriculum school, so we're a dual curriculum school. And it's really exciting to be here because safeguarding is something that is close to my heart as DSL. I also think that it's been one of the most fulfilling parts of my job, challenging but fulfilling. And I'm happy to talk about all of the experiences that we've had. think Zen's frozen.
Oh, maybe Zen's having some technical difficulties, or so until she joins back. Jim, can you please give us a brief introduction?
Yeah, thank you, Danny. My name's Jim Burdett. Currently work for a company called Cognitas Global Limited, and we assist organisations particularly in areas of crisis management. So we assist with policies, with training, with exercising, with evaluations. Previously, I worked for 12 years in schools, so I've got some specific subject knowledge on education. I'm really looking forward to joining in the chat today.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jim. And Paul?
Hi.
Last but not least?
Last but not least, yes, thank you. Looking forward to the chat today. My name is Paul Bray. I'm the founder and director of Insight Training and Consultancy, and also the training lead for Send International. I've got various hats on. I was a teacher for over 25 years, both in mainstream and SEND specialist provision, ranging from Key Stage 1 to head of a post-16 SEMH provision for 8 years as well. So safeguarding in all its forms is very important to me. We do a lot of different types of training. We do behaviour support training. We do Thrive support, which is trauma informed. We also do relationships and health education training, all of which I think comes under the banner of safeguarding. So I think everything that we do is about safeguarding and doing what we can, making sure that what we do is in the best interest of the children that we support. Lovely to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Daniel. Apologies, I've lost my connection there. Right. So I've worked in schools for a number of years. I was vice principal in Qatar, part of a brand new team. And I've worked with a lot of safeguarding leads here in the Middle East and supported them to ensure that they are implementing best practice. But I'm going to start with Sydney, and my question is focused on schools. So what are the key safeguarding challenges specific to international schools that professionals who are working in the educational institution should be aware of?
Thanks, Zen. So I think there are a couple of things that are common across schools and irrespective of where you come from, and there are some things that set us apart. So I think in this part of the world, cultural diversity is one of the big concerns that we have around safeguarding, because people come from different backgrounds, they have different understandings, different thresholds, of what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. And I think cultural diversity is key in addressing safeguarding issues, particularly in an international school context. I also think language is potentially a barrier, and I don't mean that in the sense that the language that we communicate in, but do we have a shared and common language to discuss and articulate concerns in safeguarding and mechanisms and ways in which we deal with them? And I think we've adopted a UK-based model, and that has given us a common language that sort of has bound together the community so that we are able to communicate issues, communicate trends, communicate escalation routes, so that we know that everybody understands the common difficulties that we face. But I think also, having said that, there are judicial and legal complexities that come into play when we are in different parts of the world or working out of international school context, because what is acceptable in one part of the world may not be. And again, it's linked to culture and it's linked to that diversity piece, but it does add a level of challenge. So there are some things that, for example, we can't address in the UAE, and we have to respect the law and we have to respect the expectations that are there for us. And so those are the couple of challenges that safeguarding teams across international contexts would face.
Wonderful, thank you. Mike, would you like?
I think I know what she's going to say.
I think if you'd like to add anything to that, Mike.
Of course, yeah. Yes, I think one of the major kind of trends we're seeing globally, it's a challenge for all schools, not just international schools, is the threat from online activity. So online safety, I think, is becoming a very significant issue for most schools. And I think that's probably become even more acute certainly since COVID. We've seen a lot more children going online since COVID. And in fact, one estimation has put it around 92% of children over the age of 7 have got access to the internet. And I think that raises all sorts of potential risks. So there's, obviously the risk from things like cyberbullying and harassment. We've seen a big increase in cyberbullying globally. We're also seeing the threat from sexual harassment online as a major problem as well. Lots of concerns about child-on-child or peer-on-peer abuse that takes place online as well. And that's in addition to some of the more common problems associated, I think, with online activity. So things like intrusion. We've got problems, I think, as well with excessive screen time, the issues that come about through social media activity and so on. So I do see that probably as one of the biggest risks that schools are kind of facing, because a lot of that activity is taking place without teachers, other staff and parents even knowing about it. And one of the big problems is the fact that quite a lot of those incidents are never reported in the first place. So how do we overcome that kind of problem? So I would say that online safety is certainly a big challenge, I think, now for the majority of schools out there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mike. Paul?
Yeah, thank you both. I think Sydney, what both Mike and Sydney were saying was absolutely true. I mean, what we need to understand from what Mike was saying about peer-on-peer, that actually peer-on-peer harmful sexual behaviours now makes up about a third of all sexual abuse. Teachers are in a perfect position to be able to identify those early indicators of harmful sexual behaviour as well. So that's necessary. I don't know whether you can still hear me or whether I'm...
Oh, just lost it.
Oops, we lost you there, Paul. Apologies.
That's okay. Yep. We were just talking about how, I hope, I came across what we were talking about as far as harmful sexual behaviour, is that's about a third of all sexual abuse is from peer to peer. So teachers are in a unique position to be able to support and see those early identifiers of this behaviour. And a bit like Sydney was saying about language, we need to think about victims and perpetrators around when we talk about this issue. It's about being impacted by and displaying these behaviours, and the support needs to be had for both. I would, because it's my background, my special educational needs background, again talk about those children who are more vulnerable, whether they're in international school, UK school, those with learning disabilities. And SPCC would say 3 times more likely to be abused by the neurotypical peers, and that's something that we need to be aware of as well.
Wonderful, thank you, Paul. And Jim, would you like to add to what the other panelists have said?
Yeah, I guess the whole movement of more and more services going online just generally mean that schools' vulnerabilities to cyber attacks are getting ever more important. So that's really critical to their planning.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Jim. We've just got a bit of noise there in the background. If you don't mind just muting yourselves, panelists, please. Thank you. So there'll be lots of opportunity for the attendees to ask questions. We do have a Q&A session at the end, so please do pop your questions into the chat, and we will ask the panelists towards the end of the webinar. Okay, so my next question is about technology, and heading up business development for Education Perfect has really opened my eyes to the role that technology plays, not only in supporting students, but also the infrastructure in the schools. Now, I'm going to put my question to Jim first of all. So Jim, I'll start with you. What role can technology play in supporting child protection efforts in international schools? And what are the associated risks and challenges when it comes to technology?
Okay, well, I know there are specific, and probably Mike's a better person to talk on this one, but there are specific products specifically aimed at making it easier to report and to monitor child protection issues. And I think other ways that we use technology with our organisations is maybe making policies more accessible. So where there might be written policies that are a lovely document that it gets written once a year and filed away in a cupboard, in an emergency, how are people actually going to access that information? And we do things like create apps for schools where we've got crisis management information embedded into an app, so it's accessible for people when they really need it. Obviously, you've got a data security issue with these things, so then they need to be carefully thought out. But they can certainly enhance accessibility. On an international level, you might then have some language capabilities. So these need to be sensitive for different markets, so that different users can equally access them. But they can definitely make a difference, even in terms of training as well. So when we're running training exercises, we try and make them as realistic as possible, because a real incident doesn't just happen. You don't get it on a piece of paper that clearly explains what's going on. You don't get a nice PowerPoint saying this is what's happened. You just get evidence, and you have to interpret that evidence, analyze it, try and understand what's going on. So when we're training, we try and use technology to make those scenarios as realistic as possible as well.
Yeah, good, wonderful. Thank you. Mike?
Yes, technology, can be a major benefit to schools when they're dealing with safeguarding concerns. I think one of the major benefits is being in a position to simply identify trends. The schools now carrying a lot of data, and we've already identified all of the challenges that schools are facing when it comes to safeguarding. So there's ever increasing information that schools are having to manage when they're dealing with safeguarding. So it's increasingly important, I think, for schools to have good systems in place to be able to identify those trends, to be able to identify risk at an early stage, because early intervention is absolutely critical when it comes to good safeguarding. And I think that becomes increasingly difficult if you're trying to manage that kind of responsibility on paper. So having good technology, making good use of technology is critical. Also, when it comes to keeping data secure, again, having anything on paper becomes problematic, I think. If you've got good systems, good technology in place, that can really help you to make sure that that data stays secure, that it's confidential, that it's only accessed by the right people, and also that it's made available to the right people at the right time. So I think, again, that's a critical aspect of this. And just simply improving efficiency is the other thing for me as well. So enabling staff to be able to access systems to report concerns not only increases the efficiency, but also I think helps to encourage staff to be able to report concerns in the first place. So it all helps, I think, to in developing a strong and robust safeguarding culture. So there's lots of benefits, I think, having really good systems and processes in place, and that's underpinned by really good technology, I think.
Great, thank you, Mike. Sydney?
Thanks, Zen. I'm probably going to sound like I'm piggybacking off Mike and Jim here, but the way I see it, I think there's an educational angle here that is worth leveraging, and I think Jim talked to that. There's definitely a reporting angle as well, and I think the key one for me is, where does that information go? So, to Mike's point, 100% on the frequency of reporting and the accuracy of reporting. I think we've seen almost 80% rise in number of cases reported, because now it is being reported through a system, and they have information at their disposal. Their drop downs in terms of categories and subcategories that they can just tick from rather than have to sort of articulate themselves verbally in a conversation. So that's a key one for me. But just to piggyback off the trend spotting example from Mike, what that has done is it's also allowed us to impact curriculum changes and curriculum decisions. So using the information from those trends or the information that is coming out of teacher reporting, we're able to go back into the curriculum and say, what do we need to teach? Do we want to change our values education modules? Do we want to change our English modules and have content there that is more relevant to the things coming out of the reporting? So I think those are the three big buckets that I would categorize them into: education, the monitoring, and of course, what we can do in terms of curriculum and enrichment, so that we're addressing those concerns, even in terms of counseling, for example. How can that data inform counseling decisions, initiatives that the counseling departments in schools undertake in terms of whole school education, etc. So.
Perfect. Thank you, Sydney. And Paul, last but not least.
Last but not least, again, I will try not to piggyback as much as I can, but I think you've almost touched on the ability to record and report and to share concerns from staff's point of view, but how technology can be used and adapted to encourage children to access particular apps that I know that are out there, to maybe could share a concern whereby it's not necessarily face to face, but they can share their concerns. They can share their concerns about peers. Is all very important as well, and we need to start encouraging our children to start safeguarding for themselves as well, and to identify traits of healthy and unhealthy relationships. And I know we're going to go into talking specifically about SEN learners in a little bit, but if we're talking about technology and we're talking about safeguarding, I think we need to talk about alternative communication systems as well, and actually how can we use that technology to enable children with additional needs to access safeguarding, to be able to share concerns, or actually to be able to understand what a concern may be. And I think that there are things out there. I mean, there's Prolo Code. I'm not sponsored by anyone. I'm just saying there's plenty of software out there that actually can support our learners with additional needs to be able to share their concerns as equally as their neurotypical peers as well.
Great, thank you. So the next question is, what best practices should schools be evidencing to show that effective safeguarding capability is school-wide and not just confined to the DSL? So I'll start with Jim.
Okay, I think that comes down to promoting like a whole school culture. And in my experience, quite often safeguarding outside of the designated safeguarding lead, the training would just be a presentation as part of an inset day. So you'd get a bit of a 40-minute talk just before lunch from the DSL, and it was talking at everybody. There would be no actions by the staff, and that would be ticking the box that everyone had been trained. But as educationalists, we know that you don't just train people by talking at them. You need to get them to actually do things. If you get people doing exercises, rehearsing it in a safe space, you can look at gaps in the knowledge, you can look at gaps in policies, you can then address it. You've got a record of that as well to show evidence of reviewing, of evaluation, which is all good practice. So I think it's just a question of properly training people, putting time and effort in, rather than just kind of think, well, if we talk at people, we'd tick that box, job done.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Paul?
Yeah, I think on the back of what Jim was saying about staff training, it needs to be not isolated to an inset day here and there. It needs to be part of the culture. And one way of absolutely ensuring that happens is that there's evidence of safeguarding as a standing agenda item in almost every staff meeting and class meeting that you have. Let's start getting those staff members to share their concerns daily rather than termly, and start to understand, actually, let's revisit what certain aspects of abuse might look like. Let's have a little look about what that might look like for all our learners, including those with SEN. And again, we want every DSL not to feel isolated, because it can be an isolating feeling being there. How does a DSL work closely with the SENCO? How does the DSL work with the governor? What are their kind of responsibilities to support the DSL? And how do all the staff, parents and children interact? And does everybody know who the DSL is and how they can support them? So, yeah, I think we just need to highlight safeguarding as a routine agenda item on all meetings.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Sydney?
That's it. So yeah, I think over the last couple of years, we've begun to see this more as a culture piece, and making sure that safeguarding is ingrained in everything that we do. And to Paul's point, it includes, ancillary staff, administrative staff, so that everybody feels like they are part of the important process of safeguarding our children. And I think giving teachers, administration, and all sorts of staff a clear understanding of what safeguarding entails. So each one of us has a responsibility to ensure that the kids are safe. And I think that piece around culture, getting people to be accountable, to be aware of their responsibilities. We even added, for example, an assessment to the training element. So post the training, have you really understood what the expectations are? Do you know what the standards are? So we've put an assessment in place. We do a monthly case study of a case that has been reported within our ecosystem. We anonymize it, of course, and we say, this is best practice of what we should do in a similar situation, or an example of what we should not be doing in terms of how we approach a particular problem. So it just builds awareness, it builds consciousness, it builds understanding. I think involving governors is key so that the whole school realizes that this is a priority, perhaps the most important priority, even before educational outcomes, is to keep children safe and protected. And I think the culture piece is the big one for me in this one.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Sydney. We've got some questions coming up, so I'm just keeping an eye on them. So we will be answering questions towards the end of the webinar. Mike?
Yeah, I agree with Sydney that I think this question really talks to, the safeguarding culture in the organisation, doesn't it? It's all about having that culture in place if you're going to take a whole school approach to safeguarding. And one of the issues for me is how we can engage better with students themselves to develop this kind of safeguarding culture. So actually involving students in the approach. I think we're seeing a lot more inspections now. A lot more inspectors taking time with students, actually talking to students about how they feel about safety in the school and how they feel about safeguarding and so on. So I think it's becoming increasingly important to involve students in the approach. And in fact, there's been some studies in the USA on bullying, which demonstrates that actually if you involve the right students in bullying campaigns, it can have an incredible impact on the way bullying is perceived in school. Particularly if you're looking to change perceptions about a problem like bullying. Quite often students feel that bullying is a problem in the school when in fact it's not necessarily a problem, it's just the fact that people believe it's a problem. And so actually making sure that the right information is being communicated across the student body, I think, in relation to safeguarding issues and concerns is becoming increasingly important as part of that whole school approach, I think.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, so now we're going to speak a little bit about a topic that's, I wouldn't say it's recently come to light, but a lot of schools are now focusing on it, and the guidance that's been released in the UK and internationally really supports what we're going to be speaking about now. So the topic is mental health, and I'm going to start with Sydney. So Sydney, how can international schools support the mental health and emotional well-being of students, considering the potential impact of cultural transitions and language barriers?
Thanks, Anne. I think number one, well-being and mental health has to be a genuine and authentic priority for the school. Currently, I think in a lot of school contexts, it's an educational buzzword. It's nice to have on documents and on your website, but it may not be reflected in the culture of the school. So I think having an authentic approach to the well-being of the community and of course students first is essential. Partnerships with local organizations and with experts within the community is a key angle for ensuring that children have the right access to, people, the resources they need, the expertise they need as well. And of course, a lot of training comes from that. We've also found that getting children involved in the process of safeguarding is key to changing and transforming the safeguarding culture of the school. It's not something that adults do for children. It's something that we see as being important for children to be part of the process. And when they know that it means it's important enough for them to be involved, then they know that even the staff know that, this is a priority for the school. So I think that's a key one as well. I think regular check-ins through surveys, through audits is one of the ways in which you can gain an insight into what is an area that needs your attention in terms of mental health and well-being, and then provide the best support either through a service or a product or the experts or the resources that are required to address those problems. So those are a couple of things that schools can do to address, particularly in an international context.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. Jim, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think some of that comes back to what Mike was saying earlier about adequate recording. If you know what the issues are, you can address your resources on the right areas, really focus in on what those key needs are. And it might differ, different times of year, different schools, different age groups. There might be different priorities, and it's really important that you focus in on the correct ones.
Wonderful, thank you, Jim. Paul?
Exactly what was Sydney and Jim was saying. Also, the understanding that international learners or learners in international schools will have like an additional challenge of being in new countries, different cultures, geographical context, and actually without their kind of familiar normality surrounding them, that they're going to need that extra level of support. So it's from our perspective, from a professional's perspective, from a human's perspective, we need to be an emotionally available adult to those children. We need to understand that a lot of this is down to relationships, and we need to highlight the fact that actually if our students are feeling that their mental health is suffering or their well-being is suffering, they might be the last people to acknowledge it or the last people to be aware of it. And we need to start developing those relationships with our children to make them understand that they can come to us with their concerns as well. So I think it's on a human level as far as a systems level. I think ultimately it's down to relationships and trying to identify those kind of early indicators of people who are struggling.
Wonderful, thank you, Paul. And Mike, over to you.
Yeah, I just agree with everything everyone said. It's about developing this open and inclusive culture, isn't it? And giving everybody, I think, in the organisation confidence that they can, talk about these issues, that they can report concerns, that they're in a position to identify signs and symptoms of mental health, and that they have the, if you like, the means to be able to deal with these kinds of problems. And very often we see in organisations when safeguarding goes wrong, it's largely because people don't feel confident, they don't trust the organisation, and issues or concerns are not being reported in the right way, or they're not being shared in the right way. And I think that's a massive barrier to overcome. So I think in the area of mental health, it's increasingly important, again, I think, for organisations to have this kind of culture where people do have this confidence and this trust in the organisation to be able to talk freely.
Sure. Zen, if I could just add a point there. So the last NSPCC newsletter said that 60% of child abuse or neglect happens on the home front. And I think one of the key things that we have found is, at the beginning of the year, we even write to parents and say, as a school, this is our responsibility. And if we see something going wrong, it is our legal responsibility to report it, to act on it, and then to escalate it as needed. And I think creating awareness for parents is as important as it is for training of staff, etc. And I think them knowing that, based on where you are, that these are the laws, these are the responsibilities that schools and organizations have, can act as a deterrent to ensure that the children's mental health and well-being is, if not the priority at home, something that they will think about more consciously and intentionally.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sydney. And just adding there to what the panelists have already said, but something that I always think about, something that I always discuss during my training sessions, is understanding the local context. We're not just talking about, when we talk about culture, we're not just talking about the culture of your school. We've got international teachers from all parts of the world, but they are united by the culture of the country, for instance, that they are living in, and they are bound by the laws of that particular country. So it's really important that the schools and the school leaders and the DSLs understand what is our what does contextual safeguarding for us look like, what is the culture of our community, what barriers are our students facing, and then try to support by addressing those barriers as well. Now I'm going to go over to my next question. We've got quite a few questions that have been popped in the chat, so I will be answering them shortly. But I'm going to start with Mike. What are some of the best practices for promoting a culture of safeguarding within international schools?
I think one of the things we haven't talked about so far is contextual safeguarding. We talked about context, but I think a lot of the delegates no doubt be aware of contextual safeguarding, something that was began a few years ago, 2015, 2016, by Durham University in the UK. And this is all about really trying to develop an approach which gives us a far better understanding of extrafamilial harm in particular. So this is concerns or safeguarding concerns that are taking place away from the family, essentially away from and of course with the online threat and with the peer-on-peer abuse that we've been talking about, I think taking an approach which really starts to understand where these things are happening, who is having an influence on children in the context of peer-on-peer abuse especially, and how this abuse is taking place is becoming, I think, increasingly important for us to understand. So taking an approach which actually is trying to understand and trying to get underneath some of these issues. So in a school context, if we take something like peer-on-peer abuse as a good example, simply understanding where peer-on-peer abuse is happening in the school is a really important issue. I think the only way you can really do that over time is to again, we go back to recording and we go back to data and we go back to really understanding, how this abuse is taking place. So I really would encourage schools to think about taking a more in-depth contextual safeguarding approach to some of these challenges, because they reveal a lot about some of these problems and will help you to come to, I think, much better solutions.
Wonderful. Thank you. Paul?
You're going to take that thought and run with it, if it's all right, Mike. And you talked earlier about curriculum as well. We say that safeguarding is everybody's responsibility, as Lord Laming said a little while ago. And it's our responsibility to empower our children to be able to safeguard themselves, to identify healthy and unhealthy relationships, as we said before. Now, I'm conscious that I don't want to become controversial, but as far as the curriculum goes, we need to start thinking, I think, about our learners in a more human rights context. The human beings, they are sexual beings. We need to offer them the support and guidance to go through what is a tricky and very complicated period through puberty and adolescence. If we almost blinker ourselves from the idea that we need to have a constructive curriculum around relationships and health education, let's park the sexuality education part of that at the moment. But relationships education is really important. I would say for the learners with additional needs, probably as vital as safeguarding. We talk about safeguarding a lot within schools, and yet we don't offer a curriculum which offers the children the knowledge, the ideas, and the identifiers to keep themselves safe. And I'm hoping Danny might have put some up in the handout. So I've put some slides up from some work we've done around relationship targets and what is a healthy and unhealthy relationship within a pictorial sense, which can help learners. And also those learners who are autistic that maybe not know the subtle differences or innuendos of social interaction, about actually, if I feel attracted towards someone, then therefore they must feel attracted to me, can cause these problems that Mike's talking about before, certainly with our autistic learners. So how can we develop tools to enable them to identify what are and are not social cues about whether there is reciprocated feelings? So there's a lot there, but I think we need to also think about the curriculum content as well as systems as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paul. Jim?
Yeah, I think I just reiterate the point we made earlier that the risk landscape is never changing, and that we just can't stand still on this. And I think it is important that we involve everybody, not just schools and teachers, trustees, governors, but parental involvement as well. I mean, I think particularly we discussed about like the threats online now, how they're getting more and more important. And schools might be in a good position to put some controls in, some technical controls on what children can access in school. But the big problem is that everyone's got personal devices. There's a lot of access outside of school. Our parents, have they got the same level of awareness? Do they, they're not going to be involved in a lot of safeguarding training. What can we give them to make life easier for them? Can we publicize what safeguarding policies are already in place, give them some guidance to help them become part of the solution as well?
Wonderful, thank you. So I often hear during the safeguarding lead training that I do about staff not having the confidence to actually support students who have suffered from any type of abuse or neglect. Sydney, what do you do in your school to support students who have suffered from abuse or neglect?
Thanks, Zen. So I think we're very clear with staff. They're trained to identify potential threats. They're trained to identify signs and symptoms of neglect and abuse, but it is not their job to investigate or intervene in all of those situations. Their job is to report it accurately, to maintain confidentiality and escalate whatever it is that they've noticed. Post that, I think having a ecosystem where you've got counselors, where you've got the resources, where you've got the expertise to sort of come in, it takes a village really to support a child through that. And I think getting the information is the first and most important step. In a lot of cases, you don't always know a child has been through that experience. So having that information is one good step in the right direction. And I think post having the information, getting that ecosystem in place and ensuring that they have the support of all these moving parts is what works incredibly for the child. I think counseling is key. I think, children have become over the last couple of years more receptive of counseling. They're more open to meet with and talk to people and express their concerns or, articulate what they're experiencing and going through. And I think that's a great thing to have in terms of a culture where you have children who feel safe, who feel supported, who also feel that it's right to talk about their issues and the things that they're experiencing. So I think those are some of the things that work really well.
Wonderful, thank you. And I'd just like to point attendees towards the handouts that are available as part of this webinar. So there's lots of tips and advice on there as well. The leaders, the panelists have actually shared lots of information there, so do download them prior to the webinar ending, please. Mike, how do your schools support?
Well, I think the initial response to abuse or neglect can have a really significant impact on children. So if it's not handled very well, that can have an incredibly negative impact on children and their welfare. So I think staff being in a position to be able to manage disclosures, especially, I think is really important. Sometimes there's a rush to record things and get into the kind of process of dealing with a report of abuse or neglect, but actually the first, obviously, priority has to be the welfare of the child. And quite a lot of that first phase, I think, of a disclosure is all about listening and understanding, providing support, and where there is that, where help is needed, immediate help is needed, that should be provided. And the kind of recording stuff is almost secondary, isn't it, at that point? And then it's, as Sydney said, it's all about really making sure that, the school's in a position to access support when it needs it at the right time with, whether that's external or internal support. So maybe counsellors inside school and other specialists, or it may be external agencies that need to be involved at that stage. But all of it involves people within the school being confident about their role, their responsibilities, and making sure that what they're kind of engaged in will have a very significant impact on the child if it's not handled in the right way.
Wonderful, thank you, Mike. Paul?
I think Mike and Sydney are both right, absolutely right. It's the children and how do we support the children, but also their families. Their families are going through an awful period of time if they think that their child's been abused in any way. So what kind of support can we put into for the families as well? And also for the staff. Some staff who may have been witness to a disclosure, they need to feel comfortable and confident. Actually, they're not if they're not trained counsellors, then a bit like Mike said, we need to be mindful that we're not going down a counsellor's route where we're not trained and confident in what we're doing. So yes, we listen and we're an open ear, but then we look for independent counselling services, and perhaps there's the therapeutic interventions after abuse and neglect, a quick guide from NICE, which is maybe useful for schools to have. But how do we put that holistic support in for both the child, the staff, and also the families as well?
Wonderful, thank you.
Sorry,
yes, Sydney, go ahead.
One last point. I think while we do a lot internally as a team and as communities to support children, sometimes we have to keep in mind legal reporting obligations, and that might be the best thing we can do for that child in that situation. And I think having the confidence to do that and ensuring that parents understand that that's what we will do in a situation where we feel the child's safety or well-being is at risk. I think making sure that we follow legal reporting obligations is also key to maintaining well-being and safety.
Wonderful, thank you, Sydney. And Jim?
Yeah, I just want to echo particularly what Mike and Sydney were saying about capabilities across all staff. I mean, it's been quite a few years since I was in the classroom, but I wasn't a designated safeguarding lead, and I think whilst I would have been aware of what to do in a very obvious case, a safeguarding issue, I think it's the low-level stuff that I would have missed, that I wouldn't have recorded it, because I don't think the the procedures were in place to make it easy. You know, if you're a busy classroom teacher, these things can get missed, and I think sometimes safeguarding cases are built up of lots of little pieces of evidence. And personally, I think I would have missed recording some of those just because it wasn't easy for me to do so, and I wasn't adequately trained at that time. It felt like it was somebody else's issue because I wasn't the designated safeguarding lead.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jim. And I think we all agree that it's important that not only the safeguarding lead has the training, but the teachers, the support staff, anyone who's in senior leadership, everyone has the confidence to support should an incident occur or should a child approach one of the staff members or even the volunteers with a disclosure, then they should have the tools to be able to support that rather than waiting for the safeguarding lead to come along and then passing on the information. So, it's really important, like we've all said, that everyone has the right training and that they're confident in what they're doing. And just adding to that as well, making sure that you have a child-centered approach. Often when a safeguarding incident occurs, it becomes about the perpetrator or the adult. It has to be, everything has to be child-centered. And as a safeguarding lead or as an educator, what needs to be at the heart of everything that you do as part of the investigation or the support services that you're providing should be the best interest of that child. And you should consider what is life like for this child now and how can I make it better. Paul, over to you.
Just to add from that perfect point, then, it's about control, isn't it? I think for some children, whatever age they are, it feels like the control's been taken away from them. Control and choice is now gone because they've shared some information and now everything is gone. Other people are taking control of this now. And actually we need to make sure that there's still control and there's still choice for our youngsters who have been abused. And I think that's an important part of that as well.
Thank you. And I'll stay with you, Paul, on this next question. How can international schools strike a balance between ensuring the safety of students and respecting their rights when it comes to the use of restraint?
Restraint. Now, I did say I wear many hats. I'm a principal team teach tutor, and we do teach physical intervention and restraint, but from a holistic behavioural support process. We feel, and I certainly feel, it's about staff demonstrating restraint rather than applying it. This is last resort stuff. This is all about relationships. And from a UK point of view, this is quite clear. Anything that might instigate any physical intervention needs to be reasonable, proportionate, and necessary in a legal context. I would flip that around a little bit. Is it necessary? If it's not necessary for you to put your hands on a young person, then the reasonableness or the proportionate of level of that is kind of irrelevant. I think what happens in lots of schools is actually staff put their hands on initially rather than think about relationships. It's got to be last resort, and it's got to be, if you do it, it's because you are doing it because it's in the best interest of that young person for you to do so, to keep them safe and to keep them safe from harm. And I always think from a Thrive trauma reform process here that we know that if people are dysregulated to a point where they might need physical support, let's think about it that they can't access their thinking brain, okay, because they're dysregulated, they flip their lead. All we are doing, as far as offering physical support, that care, comfort, reassurance, is lending them our thinking brain until they're safe. And I think that's what we need to prioritize. Just because you're trained and just because you can does not mean you should. And I think we really need to stress this with all our training, all the countries in the world that have this type of training. The rights of our children and our duty of care is that what we do needs to be in their best interest. And sometimes putting hands on is not in their best interest.
Wonderful, thank you, Paul. I think behaviour management plays a big role when it comes to restraint as well, and learning the right behaviour management techniques. Now, I'm not going to put that question to the rest of the panelists. Apologies, guys, but we are a bit short on time, so I want to go over now to the questions that have been asked by the attendees, and I'll individually ask each panelist if that's okay, so we can get everybody in. Okay, so we've got a question, and Sydney, if you can answer this one, please. What are the best strategies to tackle online threats to our pupils outside of school hours?
Thanks, and I wish I had a comprehensive answer to this one. And I think a lot of the responsibility seems to come on the schools for this, but it is a combined effort. I think education and awareness is key here, because there's only that much that you can do, and then leave the children to make their own decisions and choices, and then deal with the aftermath of whatever that looks like. But I think education is the key here. So, for example, we got a student team to unpack the safeguarding policy, because it's a policy created by adults for children. So we've created a student version of that by students, and they have educated the rest of the community on what that means for them. I think the other one is to keep it dynamic, because the kind of online threats that they experience changes from year to year. It's never the same, it's dynamic. And so your policy's got to be dynamic too. It's got to be reflective of the experiences children are having in their current time that they're experiencing it. So I think keeping that dynamic is essential. We do something called the safety of the social media angle, and we send out blasts to children about just how do you safeguard yourself online, how do you identify a threat online, what tools are available to you on each of the platforms you're using. It's illegal to have a Facebook and Instagram account if you're not 16 years old. Every single child who is not 16 years old has a Facebook and Instagram account, as far as we know. And so just making sure they know, what are the privacy settings? How do I report an account that is, potentially a threat? Giving them the tools that they need to be safe, I think, is the greatest extent that we can go. Of course, the culture piece is again important here. So children realize how important it is to keep themselves safe. And then after that, you've got to have faith in the process and trust that everything that you have done will sort of have the kind of impact that you're hoping. We've not had any major incident. We've not had any major concern around this, which validates the kind of work that we do. But we definitely have parents writing in and saying, they're talking to people, they're using the internet, they're constantly on their devices. So it's a bit of regulation at both ends. I think, for example, kids having access to their parents' Netflix accounts, huge safeguarding issue right there, because they're exposed to so much content that they wouldn't normally be exposed to. And I think giving parents an equal role in this is a big step in the right direction as well. So it's not just the school's responsibility, we're equal partners, but it's much your responsibility at home to establish those rules, set those ground rules, make sure children understand the expectations and the standards that you have, so that they will follow as far as possible.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sydney. I'd like to add to that as well. In terms of educating the community, educating stakeholders, not only the parents, not only the students, the governance and the staff, But the safeguarding team needs to ensure that they're kept up to date with what is happening. What are the latest social media trends? What kind of challenges are our students facing? And that comes from building relationships with your students, but also building relationships with the wider technological companies and the communities. I was recently talking to a technology provider who wants to offer parent webinars as part of their package when they support schools. Parent webinars are included. Now, if your support system or if your partners or your service providers can offer this service, utilize it, use it to educate your community. It's not all on the safeguarding team. It's not all based on what the SLT can do, but implement it within your calendar and use these partners to actually share this knowledge and share this information. Jim, I think you wanted to add something there.
Yeah, I was just going to add to Sydney's point really about supporting parents with just guidance on how they can best protect at home, informing them of different settings that they can apply on different devices, on different platforms, because not everyone's got the time to actually go into all the details for each of their platforms, work out what they can and cannot do. If we can give people easily accessible information in different formats, just make life easy for people.
Wonderful, thank you. Now we've got quite a few questions, so I'm going to go over to Mike with this one now. Mike, please define DSL once more.
Sorry, say again, I didn't catch that, Sen.
Can you please define DSL?
Oh, the designated safeguarding lead is DSL.
Yes.
Obviously, the role itself has become, I think, increasingly more challenging and complex over the last 5 or 6 years. There's a lot more guidance that safeguarding leads have to, take into account now. I think the role has become, increasingly important for schools. It's not just about looking after the policies and the procedures for safeguarding. There's a far wider role, and a lot of that role now is about how the DSLs or how the team actually develop a really good, robust safeguarding culture. We've mentioned culture a lot during the course of this session, haven't we? And I think the DSL has got a really, really important role in leading that culture. So it's not simply about making sure that boxes are ticked and policies are just complied with. It's about how do you actually get into a situation where the organisation is really proactive and is operating in an ethical way to make sure that everybody is confident that the safeguarding in the school is effective.
Wonderful, thank you, Mike. Jim, I'm gonna. My next question is for you. Somebody's put, Jim, thank you for bringing out the issue of training of staff. It will be key to share what topics areas should be covered when training staff.
What topic areas? I would create some example scenarios of issues that might occur and get staff to work through them as a group. Get some input, so you get different departments talking to each other, different levels of people talking to each other, and just collaboratively work through some examples, just put together some different ones, work through them.
Okay, thank you. Paul, I'm going to put this one to you. How can we fully support children who are in danger but their families do not see the problem, either because of culture or religion, if there are no governmental bodies that support protect children from things we schools might consider harmful?
Okay, I think I've got most of that. I think it comes back down to relationships, isn't it? Ultimately, I know I've talked a lot about relationships over this last hour, but I've gone off again. I don't know whether you can still hear me, but I'm going to try and come.
Yeah, we can hear you. Oops, we lost you there.
In times to disappear. Again, we would like to think, and I'm a believer in this, that the vast majority of the parents and the vast majority of professionals within education want the best for the young people. And I think that if we're talking to parents about encouraging their children to identify healthy relationships, unhealthy relationships, understand about consent, understand about keeping themselves online, understanding about harmful sexual behavior, understand about the variety of abuses that can be part of a young person's life, then I'm still very hopeful that parents will kind of acknowledge that and want to work with us in collaboration to support their children as well. Any intervention is far more likely to work if the parents and the school are working collaboratively. And I think it's up to us to make sure that that olive branch and that understanding is there. And if there might be different cultural differences, I mean, I've worked with a lot of schools that are predominantly Muslim, where their thought processes around RSE, which is relationships and sexuality education, is different, culturally different than mine. So let's find a way together. Let's find a way where actually there's more that connects us than keeps us apart. And I think we can, if we talk about relationships, find a way where actually the common denominator is the best interest of the children.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes, Sydney, go ahead.
10 seconds to what Paul said. So that is the best approach, and I think it is the one that should be the predominant approach. I worked in a school where we had a situation that is similar to the question that the question raises, and I think at the end of it all, the final, when we had tried everything and everything had failed, I think the important thing for us to do was seek legal advice and escalate it to whichever level we could eventually escalate that matter to, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we've done everything in our power to make sure that the child has the support, that the right people know of the issues or the risks, and that we have covered all our bases in making sure the child has the support that they need. So when it doesn't work, I think getting legal advice, getting the right people in is one of the ways that you can support the child.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sydney. I'm referring to your school's policies and procedures. That's what they're there for, to provide guidance. If you're working in a school, you should have in place a network for support, right? You should be your principal, your safeguarding lead, your governance. Everyone should be there to support safeguarding. So always refer to your policy. That should be updated regularly, at least once a year. And then obviously when there's any guidance that's been released. Okay, so I'm going to go to the last two questions. I know we've gone over time. I do apologize. Okay, so we've got a question here, and I'm going to put this question to Mike. I run an online academy and have students of different abilities, cultures, language barriers coming in from different parts of the UK and other countries. I would like to know what to do as the DSL if a student discloses something in a breakout room to me or to one of my tutors. Who would I report to or share any concerns with? Thank you.
Yeah, it probably depends on the type of concern that's being disclosed, but I would say the obvious thing to do is to make sure that whatever's being disclosed is being properly recorded. So that's the first thing. So I think the organisation have got a responsibility to do that. So they've got a record of what is actually being said. The second thing is, depend on the nature of what's being reported, what immediate support can be provided, if any, and what advice can be provided, if that's appropriate. So I think that's also important. So you're actually dealing with the issue that's being raised. And then thirdly, if there may be then a need to report that concern to whatever jurisdiction applies. And so it may be that, for example, if it's in the UK and it's a disclosure of abuse, it may be that a report to the local authority, that relevant local authority in the UK needs to be made, or there needs to be a report made to whatever jurisdiction applies to whatever nation, state or country it applies to. So I think there's quite a lot to think about, but I think the important thing for whoever's on the end of that disclosure is to make sure that whatever's being reported is being fully recorded, so you've got a good record. That is absolutely critical because you'll be relying on that. You can't just sit back and do nothing. There is a responsibility, I think, to respond to anybody's concerns, and to and it may be sometimes you're in a situation where there's not a lot of practical support you can provide, but you can provide good advice, I would say.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mike. Right, and the final question. Okay, I'll go to this one. How about if a teacher or staff is constantly being attacked, bullied or threatened by a student or a group of students? How could we check the safeguarding in our school for our teachers? Sydney.
Thanks, Zen. So I think that's a really, really important one, because safeguarding as a culture is not about the students alone. It's about everybody, but it is predominantly for students, of course, in a school context. One of the things that I think we've been inspired by is having anti-slander policy, and that sort of takes care of things that can be said or done against adults, and things that, where the school stands on what you can say or do to an adult. And I think having those policies in place on paper is a deterrent, because children know, and of course adults know that there are some things that are not acceptable. But having said that, I think I will keep going back to the culture piece, because if you are in a position where you have students teaming up against a teacher, there's something wrong in the DNA of the school, in the culture, that needs checking and that needs rectifying. And that might mean, going back to the drawing board, setting expectations again, clarifying consequences so children know how situations like these escalate and what those consequences are. We talk to our children, constantly about their rights, but they've also got responsibilities. Do we spend enough time talking to children about the consequences of their actions? So I think if that is a situation that you are dealing with, then there's a culture issue there that needs tackling first. That is perhaps the root of the actual problem, and not just what you're seeing on the surface level.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Just want to say thank you to all our attendees. Unfortunately, we are at the end of the session. We've gone over, and I'm sure you'd agree we can sit here and talk about this very, very important topic for a very, very long time. But thank you, Jess, providing us with an opportunity to actually learn from each other, and actually share our commitment to protecting the community, not only for the safeguarding but also for the well-being as well. I urge each and every one of you to actively participate in events like this, and look forward again to supporting you. We will be at GESS live in October, and hopefully a lot more insights, and we can answer more questions. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Zen, Mike, Jim, Sydney, and Paul. That was very insightful and informative. We had so many great questions, as you mentioned, Zen, come in that we unfortunately couldn't get to, but we'll try to respond to them by email maybe after the webinar. And if anyone from the audience also has any further questions or clarifications or would like to connect with our speakers, please feel free to send an email to marketing@guesseducation.com. You'll also be redirected to a short survey once we end the webinar, so please tell us what you thought and if there are any topics you'd like to hear about. Thank you again to our sponsor, Microsoft. Make sure you get in touch with them if you'd like to find out more about their solutions to accelerate learning opportunities for all students. If you want to enjoy the webinar all over again, you can do so, as we'll be uploading it to our GESS Education and YouTube channel and sending it out to all attendees by email. A massive, massive thank you to our panel and also you, our audience, for tuning in. We'll continue to discuss this vital topic at GESS Dubai later this year, as I mentioned, and many of the speakers that you heard today will be there to deliver live sessions. We'll also continue to run webinars throughout the summer, so please make sure you're subscribed to our newsletter, follow us on social media, and visit guesseducation.com to stay informed of our latest events. Thank you all once again, and until next time, please take care and have a great day.
Thank you.